So I currently have a game which is quite simple. I have a score that starts at 0. When my keyboard control player rolls into the green cubes, it adds 1 point to the score. When I collide with these little enemies who are following me around, my score goes down. When the score gets below 0, it actually loads a new scene, which might be my end game scene, or it could be, another level, or it could go back to the original GUI, whatever I want to put in there it can be. What I would like to do is actually have another point in my game, which is an end point. So the idea is that I have to make my way through the maze, collecting as many of the green cubes as I can, avoiding as many of the red cylinders as I can to make it to the end point of my game. So it's just another way to kind of send the game to a new scene. So in order to do that, I'm going to add a new 3D object into my hierarchy. So we can go create 3D object, and this time I'm going to create a capsule, and we can see my capsule has appeared in the center of my scene here. I can, if I want, set those values back to 0 if I can't find it, and then move it around from there. I'm going to increase the scale of this on the X, Y, and Z axes to 10, so that it's kind of like a tower or something that we could see from a distance, so I know what I'm trying to aim for. In my assets window here, I'm going to create a material for this. I have a blue material here already that was being used previously, so I'm going to change this one to end goal material, and I will put that onto my cylinder or onto my end point. Also in my hierarchy up here, I've renamed things to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. So on that capsule, I'm just going to rename it EndPoint. Okay, so essentially this is very similar to the way we wrote our script for rolling into these options. So instead of disappearing when I collide with it, I would like it to send me to a new level. So the way that we can do that is to go into our player controller script. So in my assets scripts menu, I can open up my player controller script. And here I have my script so far, which is basically controlling all parts of my game as well as the movement of my character. So I have my fixed update function, which is controlling the movement of my character. I have an on collision function, which at the moment is managing the collisions between the cube or my pickup item and my enemy. And I also have this void set count text function, which is managing my score and sending me to scene 2 if my score gets below 0. I'm going to add a new function here. Alright, so very similarly to the way we wrote a function up here for our collision enter, we're going to write a function that allows our player to collide with our endpoint and then load a new scene. So rather than having a collision, we're going to actually write a trigger enter function, and it's very similar to a collision enter function, except it will work for items that don't have a rigid body on them. So trigger enters are things we can use for items that don't have a rigid body, that don't need to adhere to gravity or need to have any movement placed on them. They're a static object, and we need to mark that object as an actual trigger. A collision enter function is only really used for things that have a rigid body on them. So underneath our void set count text function, making sure we're well outside that bracket, but still within our public class mono behavior bracket, we're going to write our on trigger enter function. Now you can see automatically it's very similar to the functions that we've written in the past. We have our word void for function, on trigger enter, collider other. So this function will run when it collides with a trigger. Once it collides with the trigger, it's going to run this if statement. If other game objects compare tag is end goal, then scene manager load scene next level. So making sure we close our if statement brackets, then we close our on trigger enter brackets, and making sure that we still have that public class mono behavior bracket closing. We can save this and come back to our Unity game engine. Making sure that we don't have any major errors down the bottom, any red errors, we can now double check what that's done. So when we come to our player script, we can see we still have this player controller here. Now there are no new variables to set, but we did tag some things. So we need to make sure that in our hierarchy here, those elements have their tags on them. So if we come to our endpoint, we need to tag it as endpoint. So its name is endpoint at the moment, but up here its tag is still untagged. So we can go add tag, we can add, making sure we use the same capital letters as we used in our script. And we can now add that tag to our endpoint. We can also see down here when we look at its capsule collider, there's this option for isTrigger. So because we're using an onTriggerEnter function, we need to make sure that is ticked. Now, as I said before, if we had a rigid body on this that was adhering to gravity, ticking this option would cancel out that rigid body. So the onTriggerEnter function is only used for static objects that don't have that rigid body physics attached to them. So with our endpoint selected, we should now find that when our little player here collides, it's going to try and load a new level, which is called next level. Now if I come into my scenes here, we can see I have a few scenes, but none of them are called next level. So I'm going to create a scene, and I'm going to call it next level, making sure again we use the same capital letters as we were using in our script. And we also need to add that to our build settings. So if we come up to our file build settings, again we can see I have 3 scenes in my build, but I actually have 4 scenes in my asset window that I want it to relate to. So I need to add that scene to my build settings, and I can close it. So now when I press play, I should see that my endpoint is the wrong name. Okay, so we can see down here that it says tag end goal is not defined. I've accidentally called this endpoint. So if I come in here and add a tag, I'm just going to add a tag to it first. Call this one end goal. Come in here and add end goal. Okay. So now I should find that it does actually load my scene. So when my sphere rolls into my tower, it's loaded a new scene for me. Now that scene's empty at the moment because I've only just made it, but it would now load my next level or a GUI screen or whatever it was that I want to appear when I run into that tower. So once you have tested that this is working, we can actually place that end goal somewhere in our scene that's sort of difficult for the player to reach. So somewhere far away.